Major funding for these programs is provided by the CUNY TV Foundation, Capital One Bank, Geneva Burns, Gian Tomasi and Webster, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Perfect Building Maintenance, the Wickoff Group, New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding is provided by AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, Colliers International New York City, Cushman & Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG Partners, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Eastern Union Funding, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Herrick Feinstein LLP, Hersha Hospitality Trust, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides Centurion Holdings, Margolin Weiner and Evans LLP, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Matone Group, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, New Banks, People's United Bank, Popular Community Bank, RBS Citizens Bank, SJB Properties, Sterling & Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, and These Friends.
The retail market is on fire in New York, in the region. Everybody is shopping. The people are spending money. New stores are opening up from around the world. So where are they coming from? Who's renting? Who's buying? What's happening over there? So today I've assembled a group of 4 prominent individuals who really understand the retail business. My guests today include Michael Matone, who is the Executive Vice President and the CFO at the Matone Group. Peter Meyer, who is the Senior Vice President at New York Community Bank. William Friedland, who is a Principal at Friedland Properties. And last but not least, Andrew Goldberg, who is the Vice Chairman at CBRE. So I have 2 major owners. I have a broker, intermediary, and then I have the man who has the money. So I'm going to ask the man who has the money, how do you, as a banker, look at the retail today in New York City and the suburban areas?
Right now, we're very bullish on retail in the city, on Long Island. You got a lot of new players coming in, maybe some players from other parts of the country coming into New York, finally coming into New York. Makes us feel good that these new players are coming in. They have big balance sheets behind them to rent these locations. That makes a perfect opportunity for us to finance these locations.
So, which is a perfect thing because you can't build these locations or do work or pay for these locations unless he and other members of the banking community are over there. So who are the new tenants? Who are the people? Because you're more in the boroughs and Long Island. Mm-hmm. William, even though they have the boroughs in other areas, is really the Madison Avenue, West Side, and other properties. So who's coming in? Who are the new tenants that you're seeing?
Seeing a lot of restaurant chains, national restaurant chains coming into the boroughs. Olive Garden, Darden Concepts, Joe's Crab. And then we've also had some Fairway in our Roosevelt Raceway location as well.
I remember where the Fairway, which was a Home Depot Expo, which was a product that didn't do well. Do you see any more of the home improvement? Do you see the Lowe's coming in there?
I think that has kind of come and gone. I don't know if it'll be back as home prices start to appreciate, but I think right now that's still kind of dormant.
But you know, you bring up the Fairway because it's really a great store. The entire complex is great, and you have another sports store potentially coming in there, and you have the movie theaters. You know, on some of your properties, would you like a Fairway on some of the properties that you have?
I'd love a Fairway, sure. It's always nice to have credit tenants. A well-run local tenant is just as good and sometimes easier to negotiate a lease with. To answer your earlier question, we're also seeing new tenants come in. On the luxury end, it's mostly from Europe, and also smaller designers who have hooked up with large pools of capital.
A lot of people would go to Madison Avenue, and in addition to retail, it was more of a branding. It was like, it was a signage type of thing to say, I'm here on Madison Avenue, you know, I want to make the presence known, or the Fifth Avenue, which you've done many leasing. Do you still see that happening?
Well, we've never had a tenant admit to us that they're there for branding. Every tenant always says they only make money, and we can't look at their books, so we don't know if it's true or not. But it appears that certainly a number of tenants go there, not with making money as the primary focus, but really trying to establish themselves as a leader in whatever their category is.
You know, 3 years ago, there wasn't a Uniqlo, there wasn't a Hollister. You know, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, there wasn't an H&M. Dick's Sporting Goods still hasn't come to Manhattan, even though you had a deal on that. So who do you see?
It's not that a lot of the leasing that's happening right now isn't necessarily new players. It's a lot of the guys you just mentioned. It's H&M taking several large blocks of space, and they're expanding, or they're relocating existing stores as those leases are starting to roll. So we're seeing, you know, in that mid-tier teens market, we're seeing, you know, H&M with multiple stores. We're seeing Urban Outfitters. We just finished a large lease in Herald Square, and they did another one downtown. So a lot of the names are names you already know. It's just expanding those stores, or expanding the actual store sizes, or expanding in the market. On the luxury front, as William said, those are some new names. Those are some of the large luxury groups with brands that aren't yet in the U.S., opening up their flagships on Madison Avenue or looking on Fifth Avenue.
But besides the flagship location, for example, the bank, New York Community Bank, you know, certain times you go to areas which haven't really been there. And when Gluck and Chatrit built on Park West Village, on Central Park, the bank was very involved. They did the financing for the retail over there. And it was a major retail, because you had TJ Maxx was going into yours. They had a Home Goods. They had Whole Foods. And, you know, that was a question of a pioneering. But NYCB was there. Today, on pioneering, do you see any areas that, because your family's owned properties for 40, 50 years, that you were sitting on, that there's a change in retail concept besides the restaurants? Or
I think, you know, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, you know, springs to mind as a hot market where you've had tremendous residential growth, and you know, but not a lot of retail. You know, it's obviously challenged with finding spaces that work for most retailers, but I think that's a tremendous opportunity in that area.
You've gone to the far west side, not the far west side, I mean the upper west side, over there with that beautiful property that you did with Rose Associates, the Law Stand. Now, you have 2 tenants over there, and I hate to say the pharmacies are there, but the pharmacies were like the banks of a couple years ago.
There's a need for it. It's extremely convenient. I used to live on top of a pharmacy, and it was amazing. It was open 24 hours a day, and we used it a fair amount. And people, even though there's a pharmacy about 2 blocks away, and there's one across the street, the Apthorpe Pharmacy, which is also a tenant of ours, there's a need for, it's not just prescription drugs. These places are acting as convenience stores. They're serving a role that pharmacies didn't traditionally serve, and especially once Dwayne Reed sort of stepped up the game with offering higher end products in a nicer environment. All the pharmacies have really changed what they offer in the city.
You know, with regard to the pharmacy, and it's true that when your grandfather and your uncle and your father were pharmacists over there, there was a business. You know, they had soda. You know, and now the pharmacy is selling everything. The only thing that they're omitted, because New York State hasn't allowed, is they're not allowing liquor. But, you know, they all sell beer. They all have the convenience stores. You know, they are really an adjunct of a supermarket. Mm-hmm. What about, and I want your question on this, and maybe something that you've seen, a big area that's going in especially in Duane Reade, it's called the DR block, DR Doctor in the Walk and the Doctor. MD City Med is opening a place. Do you see the medical groups going into the pharmacy? Because CVS has one in Staten Island, and they have medical clinics in New Jersey, but they haven't come to New York City yet. Do you see them potentially?
I think it's possible, but I think it's very expensive space. So in places where, let's say, a CVS is just on the ground floor, it's very expensive to give that space to services where you're having a highly paid person see one person at a time. When you could put 500 items on, per square foot if you were lining them up to the ceiling. So I would be skeptical of that for ground floor space.
And what about you? City Med has opened up 7 or 8 ground floor retail locations in Manhattan. They've opened up, I think, 3 or 4 in Brooklyn, and not sure about Queens. Have you seen that?
Yeah,
the
they're
proliferation?
coming through to our buildings as well in the space that we're marketing. It's a new concept, and the whole use is new for retail because they're looking at retail high streets. I mean, they're looking where, on 3rd Avenue they opened up.
3rd
in
and
the
37th
60s,
Street. They also 3rd and
3rd and
37th. 86th Street has a couple.
Yeah, and they've come through to where there's commuters and where there's large, residential populations. So we're seeing that more and more.
Michael?
Seeing it a lot in the boroughs and the island. A lot of, the First Meds and Premier Cares and stuff like that. And, they have similar requirements to retailers. They want to be where people are at. They want to have parking. It's got to be convenient. And that business.
Pete, how do you see it as a bank?
We see it. I mean, we're seeing more of it, and we are financing it for some of our bigger clients. Some of the issues that we have for that is what kind of licenses do these operations need from the state? I mean, with daycare centers, they have daycare licenses, and we know all about it. So these are all very new to us, so it is a learning process for us to figure out if you have a doctor or a walk-in medical clinic on the ground floor, or even a 2nd floor, what do we need? Do we have to make sure they have waste manifests and, the proper licenses from the state, and is it federal licenses? And so that's a process we're going through. We're getting through it, and we're not scared by it, but we're just walking our way through it. We'll finance it. We'll, because if it's next to a CVS is drawing the traffic in. It makes sense. So that's what we're looking at.
We bring up 2nd floors, and prior to the show we were talking about vertical retail. And I mean, you've been very active. You did the Gucci and Trump. You've done a lot of the stores. Basically, Trump was a failure, okay? The retail, the 2nd and 3rd floor are still nothing to speak of over there. Vertical retailing today, what's your thoughts, all of your thoughts, as an owner, vertical, below grade, like we were talking about on the west side? How do you see that? Because at one time, retail was 1st floor.
In New York, it's a requirement. You can only be so big because the buildings are only so large. So as everybody wants to do more business and figure out how to expand their product lines, they need more space. So, at Trump, I think you look at the Gucci store now is 4 floors there and
right.
Extremely successful. As they get bigger and go up, if you walk down 5th Avenue now, you'll see that most of the retailers now are all vertical there. And it's not just there. I mean, Urban Outfitters we did is almost 60,000 feet. That's spread out over 3 floors. So in New York, if your concept requires space, you have to go vertical.
But here's, I think, an interesting thing. Gucci is on 4 floors. Urban Outfitters is on 3 floors. TJ Maxx is going to be in a couple of floors for you. What I'm saying is what Time Warner did, where people went to the 2nd floor, that there was separate retail. The vertical retailing of having retail on a 2nd floor hasn't really done that well.
I agree. I think it's easier when you can at least offer ground floor access and ground floor signage. But the smarter national and international players understand that and are able to adapt what would be a much more simple box in suburban anywhere. They're able to adapt to the New York restrictions.
And I've seen the bank has recently done a great property on 125th Street, with a DSW. Are you seeing a lot of the DSW, the designer shoe, coming into Manhattan and the urban areas?
That's seeing, I mean, they have a specific market where they go and they have a footprint they need to get to. So we're not seeing them necessarily down in Midtown Manhattan here.
I want to talk about specific markets, like what NYCB did with Park West, which was an interesting, and it's done well. So we have right now a couple of developments in a couple of places, like Mike was talking about Williamsburg. Unfortunately, there's not that much space over there in Williamsburg for the prime location. But we have the meatpacking district, which was hot as a fire, which is quietly today. So I'd like your opinions of the meatpacking district, the Hudson Yards, the far west side, you know, maybe the Inwood, the urban area, you know, urban retail over there, maybe Bed-Stuy or other parts of Brooklyn, you know, and you know, the true markets. And more important than that is what's going to happen with the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan.
Well, I think Lower Manhattan, World Trade Center, World Financial Center, all of that change. That's all coming. That's just another, you know, year and 2 years out, and I think that's going to be great. I think the old World Trade Center retail wasn't the best retail layout, given the way the buildings were built, but it was very successful. And I think now with a retail mindset, I think it's going to be great retail. So I think downtown Manhattan's a market.
Have you looked at downtown Manhattan too?
We've looked everywhere, and I mean, I agree with Andrew. Nobody offered us the World Trade Center site, but that's going to be very successful. You have 16 train lines, 100 bus lines, 4 billion square feet of office space. There's no way that those people won't want and need to shop there. So I'm sure it'll take some time to settle out exactly what's the best and what's not the best, and probably the World Financial Center will differentiate itself a little bit from the World Trade
because
Center.
it is, as one would proverbially say, it's a schlep. You know, going from the World Trade Center to the World Financial.
Right, but
it's a big walk, and you know, you don't really go there unless you have an office there or you reside over there.
You're still going to have, I mean, when all is said and done, it's going to be one of the top tourist destinations.
There's no question.
So you're going to have a whole mass of people that weren't going down there years ago. So all of those people are going to need places to go once they're there, after they go to the museum and the memorial.
What about the meatpacking district?
I think it's interesting. The architecture is beautiful. It's very cool. A lot of people like the High Line. But you don't have the population depth that you have, or the transportation availability that you'd have in a downtown. So it's a little bit harder for the retailers to really do the volume. I think there will always be branding opportunities there. I don't think that it's going to be terrible, but I don't see it having the same growth that it's had over the last few years.
You've had a lot of properties in Brooklyn and downtown Brooklyn. Today, with all the new apartments being built, the buzz about the Barclays Center, you know, you're going to have two major teams over there. What do you see happening in your neck of the woods?
So what we're doing right now is transitioning a lot of those older properties to more traditional retail, just taking advantage of the fact that these neighborhoods have changed over the past 20 and 30 years, and there's a lot more activity in the area. There's actually a lot more disposable income in these areas, so we're trying to take advantage of that. And it's been great because there are so many retailers who have been locked out of these markets, not able to find locations, that we're now able to tap into.
So what type of tenancies are you getting?
So it's the cell phone guy, the restaurant. Those are two of probably the more prominent guys out there right now.
You know, the bank its roots are really based with Queens County Savings Bank and others. Queens is still, you go, I mean, Flushing, it's a very interesting market. More interesting because I recently learned that most of the retail in Flushing is owned by the tenants. The Asian community likes to own their property. They like owning that situation. What's happened? What do you see in Queens? Because you do a lot of business in Queens.
We do. We see a lot of, especially along the strip along Northern Boulevard. A lot of that stuff has changed hands over the last couple of years. bigger name tenants, but they're making improvements to the property. So if it's a retail on the ground floor, apartments upstairs, they're making that retail very attractive now, which is bringing in that traffic. And then down in Brooklyn and Williamsburg specifically, we've done a ton of lending down there to multifamily. We want to see the retail come in, and we'll finance that retail because we know what the demographics is. We know that there's hundreds of thousands of people here with an extra disposable income. They don't want to travel 6 blocks to go to a CVS or a yogurt store. They want it in their backyard. So we like to see that. I mean, vacancies down there, very little. Queens too, the vacancies are dropping, and nicer stores, that may be bigger name tenants, but they're taking their stores a lot nicer. That's what we like to see. We like to see a nice location.
You bring up a very interesting point because until Harlem USA was built, and you have properties on the west side, people who were in Harlem had to take the train to 34th Street or go over there. Now you have Harlem USA, then you have the Aurora Properties, which was financed by NY Community Bank over there, and you have, even Eddie Blumenfeld's property, East River Plaza. That neighborhood is being served because there's such a big tendency. What do you see, like with the Columbia expansion, because you have properties in that market?
Columbia is an interesting case because they specifically don't allow national tenants. They're attached to a romantic idea of, I don't know, over 100 years ago, where there are no national tenants. So they're underserving their population, and it's pushing the national tenants out to the fringe areas around Columbia. So it'll be interesting as they expand. I think you'll probably see an expansion of retail north above the campus because they'll do everything they can not to, I don't want to say not to serve the students, but they're not going to make it convenient for the students to shop.
What are you seeing in the Inwood, Washington Heights, where you have some properties? And you have properties also on your other hand.
We recently signed Planet Fitness. They opened up on 157th and Broadway. We're opening up a brand new a local grocery store, a supermarket, 15,000 feet. A lot of activity, and some of the smaller national tenants or smaller use national tenants are also looking up there.
Are we seeing the CVS's, the Walgreens, the Dwayne Reeds going to the urban areas?
Slowly, but yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
What about you got Starbucks, you got Pete's Coffee, you have the Java Man. I mean, there are all these new.
Sure. We've got there's tremendous foot traffic by some of our locations, and they just that's where they want to be. So,
as a bank, how do you look at gyms?
Gyms were not favorites. I mean, it's in the urban areas where parking isn't such a big deal. But the gyms, if they're on a second floor gym space along with the retail that fit the neighborhood, sure. I mean, we've done a ton of financing for multifamilies. All those people, all those buildings are being rehabbed, fixed up, rents are rising. Those people are now demanding services. And if that service is within a gym, we do like it. If it's a yoga place, a Five Guys Burgers or something, one of these new burger places, it adds to the value of our collateral, makes us very happy, and we'll finance that kind of
stuff.
Let's
ask, since I've touched it a little bit on Long Island with you. How about the suburban? I mean, Long Island, Westchester. How do you look at that as a retail? I mean, you're out there, but there's a lot of. I mean, where you are with Fairway and mm-hmm. what you have with theaters and the restaurants and everything else. And you have Sports Authority also, I think, or something.
That's Equity One's project.
But there are a lot of things, but there's a lot of competition.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the problem in some of the suburbs. Okay, people in the city they walk or they take a bus. When you're in the suburbs, you can take a car. You can go where you want.
Well, that's just it. Once you're in your car, you could be 5 minutes. In any direction, an extra 5 minutes, takes you to a whole new shopping area. And so we have our Nassau County stuff, we have our Brooklyn and Queens stuff, and the barrier to entry markets have clearly held up stronger than stuff where there's less barrier to entry, and more opportunities, more competition.
Do you think, I mean, we have in Queens, you know, the wholesale clubs. You know, we have Costco and BJ's. In Manhattan, we have one. You know, we have a Costco. In the Bronx, you have a couple of BJ's, perhaps. Do you see any of these, maybe a Sam's Club or these other people? I mean, the difficulty is the size. You know.
Yeah, for them to come in and do their box format in, you know, Midtown Manhattan or downtown, it's just hard to find that much land, that much space. And you have the, you know, ceiling heights, the column spacing issues, and then you just have operational issues, loading, unloading. They're bringing in a lot of merchandise every day. It's hard to get the trailers.
But you know, you bring out a great comment about bringing in the trailers. I remember when Fairway opened up on 86th Street. That was a big question, you know, because of the 86th Street and the 85th Street, you know, on the east side, you know, getting the truck to get the deliveries. You know, that, I mean, the Madison Avenue, the deliveries are smaller, higher price, okay? But, you know, and that is something that
It's
is
a big issue.
difficulty.
It is. And when you realize that Fairway, with all of the issues that were raised back then, is still only a fraction of the size of what a Sam's or a Walmart would look like in Manhattan.
Hudson Yards, I mean, once it was a plan to be an Olympic Village. Now, you know, they have really one tenant who signed a retail lease, and I did write an article about it. It's like the clash of the Titans. The Titans being, you know, Whole Foods on one side and Fairway. And they compete, because I know that both of them were competing in Williamsburg for the retail location. And basically, Fairway was ready to sign, and then Whole Foods said, fine, we had the first option, so we're going to get it. Do you see the far west side? You know, there are buildings, there's Glenwood, there's TF Cornerstone, there are others, but I don't see retail. I mean, how long is it going to take?
Well, I think you need the related project. The Hudson Yards project itself will create a lot of critical mass, and that'll create a lot of retail. And I think once you have that that whole area no longer being this big gap, I think that will support its own retail between the residential and the commercial. So I think it's legitimate. I think it'll happen. It's just a timing issue.
Have you guys looked at the far west side?
Not seriously, no. I think Andrew's right. I mean, certainly once you have the critical mass, it'll all come. But that could be 10 or 15 years. It's not necessarily 2 to 3 years. I mean, it could take a long time.
So I think we've got a pretty good opinion on where retail is today. You know, it's good for landlords, it's good for brokers, and it's good for banks. It's bullish because we're out of a recession. The economy is doing well. And people want to be in New York, and they want to shop in New York. And I'm really happy that the four of you have given myself and my audience a pretty good insight on the state of retail. I'd like to thank Michael Matone, Peter Meyer, William Friedland, and of course, Andrew Goldberg for being here. See you next week.